So I wanted to do a video about trying to get my old Yamaha SPX90 working again. Actually, it's an SPX92. These came out in 1986, and boy was it cool at the time. Digital reverb unit. Used it for my main mixing equipment, along with my Carvin mixer and Tascam 8-track reel-to-reel recorder. Got some good sounds out of this thing. This was the most advanced technology we had, for sure, out of all the gear, probably. And so it's past its prime as a piece of main studio gear. It doesn't have full 20 kilohertz bandwidth. I believe the sampling rate is around 32 kilohertz on this. It is 16-bit converters of an early type, but so it's barely 16 bits in resolution, actually a little less, but the sampling rate is well under what it should be to get full audio bandwidth, so it has limited bandwidth, so it wouldn't do for most studio use. But I thought I'd try to get it working for a guitar processor, because it does work pretty well for that, always has, and the sounds are nice on it and stuff. It would have been nice if they released a third version of this or something with increased sample rate, but instead they branched out into a lot of other stuff, as we know. But yeah, I thought for some uses I have, it would be worth getting this thing running. Well, when I tried to fire it up a couple of years ago now, actually, as I make this in 2021, it was totally catatonic. No power, no sound, no light, no nothing. So suspected the power supply. Looking at online forums, indeed it turns out that these are kind of notorious for the power supplies going bad. It has this built-in switching power supply, unfortunately, unlike more modern gear, which would probably have an external AC supply. But as you can see, they devoted a good portion of the available space in this one-unit rack box to this television-like switching power supply over here on the single-sided board that's really at a lower level of quality than the rest of the Yamaha stuff in this box. But anyway, the electrolytic capacitors go bad after 30 years, unsurprisingly. You can see it's generally gotten way too hot here. The case has no air holes when it's fully buttoned up, so this area always did get hot to the touch. And you can see that by the signature heat staining on the board that its stuff's really generally running too hot here. Well, anyway, that seems to decrease the lifespan of these critical output capacitors on the power supply, and several of them are bulging and obviously no good. I suspect the capacitors may fail in a short or high leakage mode, which then overstresses the rest of the power supply more and more until it falls enough out of regulation that it just can't start up anymore. Switching power supply, of course. So one of the solutions I saw to this commonly occurring problem on the net is just to replace this power supply with a linear supply, because its voltage outputs are not very complicated. It's got these two intimidating looking multi-conductor connectors that go to the rest of the board, but in fact all it's really putting out is plus and minus 18 volts DC, which then goes into these 15 volt linear regulators here, so it doesn't even have to be any kind of special voltage, but plus minus 18 is what they send to those, and then a high current plus 5 for all the logic on the board, which, as you can see, there's a lot. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this video, actually, is just to give you a look inside one of these units, compared to something just a little newer like the Alesis microverb that I also used to use that was kind of almost a one-chip solution. This thing's just amazing to me. Of course, we have the analog section over here, digital over here. Yamaha DSP plus general purpose microprocessor, which is probably compatible with an 8051 at a guess. There's the ROM and a whole bunch of 7400 chips here to do all this stuff. It's crazy. Amazing stuff. So complicated and sophisticated. Here's a little opto-isolator related to the MIDI ports on the back, I think. Oh yes, but getting on to practical things again though for a second, there's also an opto-isolator on this board, which is right here, I believe, that comes out on the connectors. That's the one thing that's a little mystifying at first. The plus minus 18 and plus 5 rails and the associated grounds for those two, which are different and need to be kept separate, are pretty easy to trace out on these connectors. But then there's two other conductors on the 8-pin one, I believe, which go to this opto-isolator. There's C and E for collector and emitter of the opto output transistor. The opto-isolator just gives AC line frequency, and it seems to be used for power off muting. In other words, as soon as you hit the power switch, the outputs are muted before the power supply even discharges. And also, I suspect it resets the logic or sends other signals to the CPU for orderly shutdown so it doesn't corrupt its memories and that kind of stuff. But anyway, that is still there. So even when replacing with a linear supply, ideally, you'd still keep that opto-isolator hooked up to the live AC somehow, and that would let you still use the same power switch. So you'd want to power your external linear supply off of an AC feed on the output side of the power switch of this, I would think, and then maybe cut away the rest of the circuitry. At least that's how I do it. However, first I'm going to try just replacing the capacitors and see if I can get the old switcher to start up again and work, because that would be the easiest. Anyway, back to just touring this board though. Here's the analog side. These are LC filters, low-pass filters for the input and output DACs and ADCs. Here we have two Burr-Brown digital to analog converters. They're DACs, PCM 54 HP times 2 here. When I first saw this and looked up what they were, I figured, okay, those are for left and right channel outputs, right? Well, no. They go into analog sample and hold circuitry and multiplex so that one of these is used for both of the stereo outputs, and the single monophonic input is somehow handled by the other one. And that I don't understand, because they are, as far as I can tell, not codecs. In other words, with analog input and analog output. No, they're just DACs. They have analog output, and yet one of them is somehow used for the input. I don't yet understand this, but that's what the schematic shows, and there are no other ADC chips that I can recognize in this bunch of analog circuitry here. So the claim seems true that one of these is used for the input somehow, even though it's basically an output chip. So there must be some kind of successive approximation comparator thing going on or something. The DACs are quite a bit faster than the sampling rate of this system, I'll note, so they could do quite a few cycles within one of the sampling periods. So maybe it's something like that. I don't know how the input of this SPX90 is actually done, but that would be something to find out. Here's your Yamaha DSP chip, if anyone wants to look that up, and the microcontroller, general purpose microcontroller, which it also needs to use, sadly. There's some other chip numbers for those who are interested. But frankly, I'm mostly interested in just getting the old unit working again if it can, and just so I can use it for guitar. Didn't get a chance to remember to take a video when I was taking it apart. I showed how it's done, the taking apart phase. Suffice it to say, it's taking out a lot of screws which are nicely designed to all be identical, except for one holding down this ground wire here. That's the only different one. And all the other screws are interchangeable. Nice work on that type of serviceability, Yamaha. I found it useful to, take out the long metal rod that pushes the power button. It has to be removed. The switch on this comes off the plastic cubicle head, pulls right off, which is necessary in taking this apart, I found. And also there's a metal divider between these boards, which I took out. And I found that all either necessary or highly useful in actually freeing up this power supply board enough to be able to flip it over. There you can see quite a bit more evidence of all the heat damage. But yeah, this is where I'll have to resolder those caps, which I've now ordered in the mail, and that'll be the next step, and we'll see where it goes from there.